Hello, and thank you for checking out this message from Grace Church San Diego. Christmas time comes and goes, but one thing remains. If we know the meaning of Christmas, we will be unalterably changed by the hope that is brought to this world by Jesus' birth. Christmas breaks through the darkness and brings hope to a hurting world. Stick with us as we explore this hope together. We'd love to hear how Grace Church is affecting your life. So please send an email to info@gracesd.com with your story. Or if you'd like to help support our ministry financially, you can visit the website below so we can continue to help people find Christ and become His mature followers.
I was what you could call a late bloomer. My freshman year in high school, 1996, I weighed 90 pounds and I was 4'10". I was a wrestler and the lowest weight class was 103 pounds. And so I got a picture of me right there. That's me, Jesse in singlet. I know, you like that? I could not gain any more weight while all these other Goliath guys are trying to lose weight to gain the advantage over the other wrestlers. I, on the other hand, was eating everything I could and trying to pump iron, and I could not gain any weight. It was, in some ways, an unfair fight because these guys had a 13-pound advantage over me, but I did my part. I actually lettered my freshman year, got the Letterman's jacket. Yes, I have no idea where it is, but it would fit my 4-year-old son. The thing was not very big. I ended up sticking with sports that I was, a little bit better at, a little bit made for, like surfing and snowboarding. Now, that is not Shaun White. Yes, thank you very much. I need to boost my ego after that last story. Now, Tim, I don't know if you're new to Grace or just checking us out. Pastor Tim is the lead pastor. He does a lot of the preaching. He tells me stories that he's like this incredible skier and all this stuff, and I'm like, I'm a pretty good snowboarder, and I bet I could beat you down that hill. And we have been going back and forth for years, who could be faster. Now, the winter season is upon us, right? Eventually, it's going to snow. And Tim, this is a challenge. I don't know where you're at, but you and I are racing down this hill. We're going to finalize this thing. Now, I bet in Tim's prime time, he probably could have beat me. But he's got some old man problems now, so I think it's an unfair fight. The Christmas story, in some ways, is a story of an unfair fight between two kings. And I want to blow this story wide open. I want us to get involved in this story of two kings and to discover the source of where real power comes from and how that really is meant to apply to our everyday lives. Welcome. My name is Jesse. I'm one of the pastors. Welcome if you're you got kids in the preschool. One of my sons was up here as well. Just so glad you're here with us. Merry Christmas. Online campus, we welcome you as well. And we're going to be going through the Bible this morning. And so the usher is going to be coming forward, and maybe you'd like to follow along. Feel free to raise your hand. Ushers will hook you up. You may want to follow along on your iPhone or your tablet or whatever. But we're going to be turning to Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. Matthew 2, verse 1. It's page 523 in the House Bible. So in the story, we have two kings. The first one is King Herod, or also known as Herod the Great. Now, why was he so great? He was great in part because he was a great builder for the Jewish people. He built synagogues, these places for the community centers, for God's word to be taught. He built aqueducts. He built amphitheaters. He built a maritime and administration building for trade on the harbors. But his greatest building project of his legacy was the beautification of the temple in Jerusalem. Now, people say that this could have been one of the most amazing ancient buildings of the ancient world. There's a Jewish historian named Josephus, and he wrote that the massive gold plates, when the sun would hit them and reflect in your eyes, you would have to turn away because they were so magnificent. In some places, these 60-foot tall white stone just building that when you're coming up to Jerusalem, it looked like these white stone mountains. Amazing. He extended the territory of Jerusalem. He helped them prosper economically. He built walls, and he heralded himself as the protector of Jerusalem. He was a strange mix of clever and efficient ruler, but also a cruel tyrant. And as we step into Matthew chapter 2, one of the best ways to read the Bible, especially the narrative portions of the Bible, and the majority of the Bible is story, is to put yourself in the story. Imagine what it would be like to be there. Put yourself in the story as we start in Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. It says, "Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king," Herod the Great, "behold, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, 'Where is he who was born King of the Jews?'" Another king. "For we saw his star when it rose, and we have come to worship him.' When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And assembling all the chief priests and the scribes," we're going to call these the professional, religious people, of the people, "he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And he told them, in Bethlehem of Judea." And these pros, they're quoting some prophets from the Old Testament. "And you, O Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah. For from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared. Now, Herod the Great is going to show us three characteristics of an insecure leader. The first one is that he is a strange mix of greatness and failure. Obviously, we talked about some of the reasons that he was a great leader, but he was also deeply paranoid, deeply anxious, and deeply cruel. He was not a full Jew, and so the Jewish people they rejected him as a legitimate king. And so because of that, he was constantly afraid of conspiracy. He killed his ex-wife. He killed 3 of his own sons. He killed one of his favorite wives. He killed his mother-in-law, which most of us can understand that. Anna, if you're watching, love you. He killed different politicians and community leaders, but not only them, but their entire families as well. He was cruel. He was mixed up on the inside. In some ways, he was great and had great accomplishments, but in other ways, he was really a mess inside. In the last couple weeks, there's 2 guys that talked to me individually, and I asked if I could share these stories, and they both said yes. And they began to share with me about how they were addicted sexually to stuff online and how they got into these habits and how it was eroding, destroying different elements of their life, different aspects of their life, from their career to their relationships, the way they saw other women, and their relationship with God. It felt hollow. These guys are a part of this church and leaders in this church, and they began to share this with me. The results of a mixed up inner life, in some ways great, and in other ways a mess on the inside, is we become insecure. I want to talk about the wise men. The wise men, in the Bible was written, the New Testament was written in Greek, and the wise men in Greek is magoi, the Greek word magoi, plural. They were scholars of the stars from Babylon, modern day Iraq. They're astronomers and astrologers. Astronomers in the fact that they study the stars, and astrologers because they interpret what they think the meaning of the stars are communicating to them and to people and for everyday life. They're magicians. In the ancient world, they believed that the stars were the heralding of special, especially royal people. And so they see this star and they begin to follow it west towards Jerusalem. And I bet they probably thought that King Herod was having a son. And so they're coming to pay homage. And in verse 3, Herod picks up on these wise men that have come. And it says, when Herod the king heard this, that they had come from Iraq, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. And he assembled all the professionals together, and he inquired of them where the Christ was to be born. And they tell him, based on the prophets, if this is the Christ. And it's interesting that Herod himself admits that the one he's tracking down is the King of the Jews, the Messiah, and he doesn't care. They say that he's supposed to be born in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, based on the promises of God from hundreds of years before. When I meet with a lot of people, it's part of my job, part of what I do. And in order for me to meet with someone, I got to know two things: where we're going to meet and when we're going to meet, right? Otherwise, that meeting ain't happening. So Herod has figured out where, but he needs to figure out when. And so he says, all right, professionals, bye. And then in verse 7, then Herod summoned the wise men secretly and ascertained from them what time the star had appeared, because he is assuming that when that star showed up, that's when, if this is the Christ, the Messiah, the King, that's when he was born. What is he doing? He is gathering the facts to control the uncontrollable. You see, God is speaking to Herod through the facts, through the priests and the scribes and the prophets. God is communicating to the heart through the wise men. And what is Herod doing in response to God speaking to him? He says he rejects it. I don't want to hear it. Why? Because that means if I'm going to begin to receive it, I need to change some things. And Herod does not want to change anything about his plans and his future. He wants control. I love the serenity prayer. Restore, guide, praise, peeps. Yeah, that's right. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, because, man, there's things that are just outside of my control. The courage to change the things I can. Most of that has to do with what's going on inside here. And the wisdom to know the difference. Let me give you some examples. If maybe you had a friend or a family member that was dating someone, and you recognize there's some red flags in that person, right? And some character flaws or whatever, and you're like, you can see it, but does that person that's dating them want to hear it? No. Someone knows. They are defending that person in their honor in spite of it. They don't care what the facts show. But as soon as they begin to see it for themselves, they break up or get married and get divorced or whatever, they're like, that person is the worst, right? And it's like, well, I saw that a while ago, but you ignored the facts because you wanted what you wanted. Or how about a business deal? You're like, man, I want this business deal to go through so bad. And I know that it's a bad deal, but it's going to be good for me. And you know what? The ends are going to justify the means in this case. I want it so bad, so committed to my plans that I will stop at nothing to make it happen, no matter what the facts are saying or what God is speaking to me. I'm going to ignore that to try and control the future. And in verse 8, Herod makes some plans in light to try and change the facts. It's down here in verse 8 in your Bible. And he sent them, that's the wise men, to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child. And when you have found him, bring me word that I too may come and worship him. Right. After listening to the king, they went on their way, and behold, the star that they had seen when it rose from earlier, when it rose, it went before them until it came to rest. It's leading them and rested over the place where the child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced exceedingly with great joy, because it's showing them where to go, this specific house. And going into the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they fell down and worshiped him. Then opening their treasures, they offered him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Tim's going to be talking about those gifts next week. And being warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they departed back to their own country by another way, back to Iraq. Skip to verse 16. Then Herod, when he saw that he had been tricked by the wise men, became furious. And he sent and killed all the male children in Bethlehem, in that region, who were 2 years old or under, according to the time that he had ascertained from the wise men. There's so much I want to say about this. I have a 2-year-old son. But anger and rage fills his heart. And he is so committed to self-preservation that he chooses the indiscriminate murder of children to not have to let go of his power. The third characteristic of weak leadership is when winning becomes a basis for destruction. You see, every person in this room is a leader. whether you recognize it or not, because every single person has influence in other people's lives. At home, at work, in your community, maybe here at church, at the preschool. What up, preschool parents? We all have influence, spheres of influence, and because of that, we have the ability to have leadership, influence, for good or for evil. How do you affect the climate in those places when you enter those spheres of influence? How do you affect those places? Maybe get home after a long day. Maybe you've been home a long day, working with crazy kids or whatever, and you want things done a certain way, and sparks begin to fly. It could happen, right? And arguments begin to get played out. If you're normal, that happens. And out of self-protection, you want to win, but then you realize, man, I'm actually wrong, but I don't care. I don't want to look stupid. I don't want to look weak. And out of self-preservation, all that matters is winning. And it ends up hurting people, doesn't it? I don't know if you know this, but in Florida, they actually have a sinkhole alley. Let me show you a picture of a sinkhole in Florida. Now, I bet the guy or girl who bought the land thought that he or she was buying some land that had a firm foundation, otherwise wouldn't have built on it, right? But in reality, it was an unstable foundation. And if self-preservation and winning is in your heart at all costs, you are like this. You do not have a firm, strong foundation. And when the pressures begin to get put on you, you will collapse. You will erode. You don't have the power and the strength to lead and to love the people that are in your sphere of influence. Who or what are you trusting in for your strength? In comparison to the sinkhole, imagine you bought a plot of land that you didn't even know it, but had an oil reserve underneath it. Different kind of land. You don't even realize it, but then you realize what you own, and you're like, man, I'm a millionaire. And all I got to do is tap into that resource and begin to draw on the wealth and the resources, and it provides a new power that you don't have on your own. Power that's anchored in the promises of God. A source to draw from in order to lead others and to love others well. I want to talk about 3 prophetic promises that Christ fulfills. Number 1 is the star. The star rose in verse 2, and the wise men, that's what gets them to Jerusalem, right? And then in verse 9, it went before them and rested over the house. Now, I realize that this is a supernatural occurrence, and in my studies, they're like, it could have been a supernova or all these other options. And maybe that's true. Maybe God did use that. But this supernatural direction to show them, to lead them to a specific house. But if you look at the details in this story, there's dreams. There's prophecies. There's angels. There's this star. There's all these different elements, small and big, that are showing us that God is in control. And God is orchestrating this whole thing. He is communicating that he is supreme, a secure power for your life. You get to a point of realizing you acknowledge the providence of God, both in your life and in this world and what's happening. The providence of God is this simple idea that God is directing and guiding things for his purposes and for his glory. But guess what? Also for your joy. For your joy. One of my favorite apologetics about the Bible, the thing that kind of defends why the Bible is true, is because what the Bible chooses to include in it. If there was no historical basis for the wise men, if it didn't really happen, why would Matthew choose to include a bunch of Iraqi astrologers to be the witnesses, the eyewitnesses, the credible witnesses of the birth of the King of the Jews? It would be almost an embarrassment. But it shows that God is, you wouldn't have guessed that, but God is making this thing happen. And I love it. And I don't know if you recognize God's fingerprints in your life, but if you and you look back, you can begin to see that God's providence throws curveballs all the time. Like, man, I didn't expect that to turn out the way it did, but I see that God was in it. Similar with the location of where the king of the Jews was to be born. If I was king and I was coming, guess it would look a little bit different. I'd be coming with a parade into Jerusalem. It would look a little bit like Prince Ali. You know, it'd look like Disneyland, and everyone would be like, Jesse! And I'd be on the elephant, and the horns would be blaring, and it would be a party. He's come. But God has chosen a different way. God has chosen the humble town of Bethlehem. That's the second thing that shows us, gives you power. Bethlehem, they estimate that about 1,000 people lived in Bethlehem, population of 1,000. Matthew is establishing this as a geographical location, crucial for the providence of God, the prophecies to be fulfilled. And in verse 6, the professionals, right, tell us Bethlehem in that land of Judah are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who will shepherd my people. This comes from Micah 5:2 and 2 Samuel 5:2, written hundreds of years ago, anchored in the promises of God. You see, God chose this place. He predetermined this place for the king to come, this small town. A secure power recognizes the humility of God. You see, God chose this place because he wants you to know something about himself. He wants you to understand something about his character. Him coming in a manger, coming to Bethlehem, shows you the humbleness, the humility of the nature and the character of God. I love leadership and leadership books, and one of my favorites is Jim Collins. He wrote a book called Good to Great, business book. He writes about different levels of leadership. He talks about what a level 5 leader is. A level 5 leader builds enduring greatness through a paradoxical blend of personal humility, and professional will. This paradoxical blend. Now, a level 4 leader is also the bomb. A level 4 leader, they are charismatic and they get people moving and they get the vision going and people are following them. But guess what? It's all about that charismatic leader. And as soon as that charismatic leader is gone, then the whole organization falls apart. But not so with a level 5. It's not about the leader. There's this humility. It's about the bigger thing that's happening. And Jesus comes with this humility, but also gives him this great sense of power. The third promise fulfilled has to do with Egypt. So the angel reveals to Joseph Herod's plot, and so they flee in the middle of the night to Egypt. And in verse 15, Matthew tells us, this was to fulfill what the Lord had spoken by the prophet, Hosea 11:1. That's right, it's in your outline, double check. Out of Egypt I called my son. Matthew is establishing a second geographical location, crucial, necessary for the Messiah to fulfill. All the promises are coming true. Did you hear that line when we were singing earlier? I love that line. The promises have all come true. Jesus fulfilled them all. But even he flees to Egypt because of the persecution, because of the terror of Herod. And even as a refugee in Egypt, God is somehow using evil for good. And that's the third point. Egypt represents that a secure power trusts that God can use circumstances for good. Now, as a pastor, I cannot answer for you why terrible, tragic things happen with any sense of certainty. But I can offer some bumper sticker kind of like easy answers that aren't helpful at the time, but that, yes, sin has corrupted every level of creation, from the biological molecule to the hearts of men and women to the cosmological. But I do also know this, that God, who was not created, cannot cause, has never caused, or will cause evil. But there's this amazing thing that God somehow can use those, even our bad habits, to the most atrocious for his good somehow. How does this version of Christmas, of these two kings, how does this play into real and everyday life? I want to talk about 3 practical applications for how the power of Jesus can change your life. Number 1, the power of the incarnation makes you a humble beast. Let me explain what I mean. How you guys doing out there? All right, good. Thank you. I like this part. I like all of you. But, I like when you clap. Not for my ego, but I just want to make sure we're with each other. What's up, balcony? You guys are awesome. I got to look up every once in a while. All right. When the reality of Jesus taking on flesh, the Son of God coming and taking on a body of a baby, when that begins to take hold of your heart, it will move you. It will move you. When you begin to realize that God came to where we are, he went to where the need is. He came to our brokenness. He didn't wait for us to come to him. He came to us to come and to solve our problems. When that begins to click in here and move to here, it will begin to move you in ways that you did not expect. And you just begin to show up feeling moved by God to love people and to care for them. And you see God beginning to use your life. And it's just this amazing thing to realize, man, God is using me. That's ridiculous. I love the idea of the humble beast. The Humble Beast is a record label, and about half of these artists have performed on this stage in the last year. About a month ago, we had Beautiful Eulogy and Towers, and the year before that, Propaganda, and I forget his name, performed here. All kinds of different bands. Humble Beast describes themselves as a family of creatives, pastors, writers, theologians, and musicians who leverage their talents to see the gospel go out into the community and transform lives. I love that. Humble, because it's not about them, and they make it safe. And they go out into the community using their incredible talents. I've been listening to Towers like every morning. It's so sweet. All kinds of different bands. But they also are a beast in the best way possible to eradicate pain from this world, to break down lies, to step into injustice. My buddy Scott Allen, who has been a part of my life for many years, he used to say, I was a beast for the Lord. I was a beast for Satan. Now I'm a beast for the Lord. I love that. And this Christmas, what would it look like for you to let the reality of the coming of God, the incarnation, to make you a humble beast? Number 2, the second way it applies is power begins to flow from your life to others. That story I shared with you about those 2 guys from earlier, those 2 guys that shared with me about their addictions and habits, I could see it in their eyes. As they were looking into my eyes, I could see that God has his power and his presence had given them something they never thought that they could have. It's been about 8 months now that they've been going to FMO, For Men Only. This group, it's all over the country. There's a bunch in San Diego. It's for guys that want to have sexual integrity in their life, and it's a Christian-based thing. And they're telling me how it's changing the way that the sense of self-confidence in their job and their way that they interact with other people around them. And they're so changed, and you could see it in their eyes. They're like, we want to start an FMO right here at Grace Church. I was like, that's what we need, yes. And I'll be honest with you. About 6 years ago, give or take, I went to FMO for about 2 years, every week, because I needed it as well. See you back there, brother. That is just one example, so that I know I'm pumped too. Another girl came up to me a couple weeks ago, and she's like, I have been battling depression for a couple years, and I've been working hard to overcome it. And I would like to lead a group for other people that are sad from Grace and are depressed. And she doesn't have a PhD. She doesn't have her MFT. She just has worked through this herself. And I'm sure it still comes every once in a while, but she's like, I want to help other people. And I want to create a safe place for other people here at Grace Church. You know, the leaders of our small groups here at Grace are not judgmental people because we have experienced the forgiveness of God. And who are we to judge anyone? But to extend the same forgiveness and grace that we've received, we offer it freely. But we don't want to just sit in where we're at. We want to grow beyond that. One practical application, maybe you are feeling God in 2016, you want to let God flow through your life by being a leader in this church, a small group leader. On your connection card, you can check the box. You'll see it on the back. I will call you. I want to hear what your vision is, and maybe we can plug you in to let God flow through your life. Maybe God's calling you to that. The third way that Jesus can change your life is that he offers a power that cannot be taken away from you. As Matt talked about when he was praying earlier, Jesus, the King of Kings, the one who created everything, came to earth to die on a cross. He didn't come in on the elephant, he came in on the donkey to Jerusalem. What does that tell you about who God is and how much he loves you and would do anything for you to have peace with him and to have a relationship with him? What does that tell you about who he is? If you are here today and God is speaking to your heart, is breaking into your heart and opening that up, and Jesus died on the cross, lived a perfect life, paid the sacrifice so that you can be forgiven by God. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to work your way towards it. It's a gift to be received of grace that will make you born again. It will change your life. You'll be in the family of God. And if you know, only you know, I don't know, if you want the gift of God this Christmas right now, I'm going to lead us through a prayer. We're all going to close our eyes. We're all going to bow our heads. And if you want to pray that prayer in the quietness of your own heart to God, he will hear your prayer and he will respond and he will come and make his home in your heart. Let's bow our heads and pray.